I'm only in once a week, but it leaves all the production staff on their toes. So, and I find generally it's sort of, you know, my capacity to fumble my way into a sting leaves everybody a little bit sweaty every morning.
It's kind of like slotting Dedrick Boyata instead of Vincent Kompany into the Belgian back three.
Oh, you got it. Kildare regret over tickets reads the back page of the Irish Independent this morning. The county board apologising for the fact that they fought hard to have the game at St Conleth's Park in Newbridge and never really gave a huge amount of consideration to the fact that Mayo season ticket holders far outnumber their own, and it seems as if there may even be 3-1 Mayo to Kildare supporters at this game in Newbridge tomorrow night. So, I mean, it's an unhappy consequence of a pretty interesting week for Kildare GEA. I mean, there hasn't been really any conversation about the game itself and the way that's going to go, and that's going to dominate our conversation with Billy Joe Padden a little bit later on. Southgate defence selection decisions after defeat sets up Columbia clash, writes Matt Law here in the Independent this morning. It was a slightly bizarre game last night that Belgium won by a beautiful Adnan Januzaj goal to 0. And as David Seaman, who I was listening to on TalkSport earlier, put it, Butland he could have put a bit more dive on it. He put too much dive on it. Too much dive on it. Went at it with the wrong arm, seems to be the technical description. It sort of had me thinking about, like, the underlying point about the entire game last night, whether it was the match itself or the analysis around it or any conversation about it, was the fact that England were happy to lose it. And I wondered how much that implicated
wouldn't agree with that.
On every decision that was being made on the pitch last night.
Well, I'd agree in terms of utter devastation and from England's point of view, in terms of they've lost the game, what's coming down the road in terms of the draw as it's laid out. No, not. But in terms of how it affected their approach to the game, I don't think so. I think actually Southgate had an obligation. I think he has a professional obligation himself, and a duty almost to his players, particularly players who have come in and hadn't played previously, to approach the game in exactly the same manner. And if he hadn't have done that, if his approach had been slightly different on the training pitch, anything small detail, just in terms of even attitude, how he was kind of carrying himself, wasn't taking it any way as seriously as he had done the previous games, I think his standing would drop in the eyes of the players, and I think he would have known that. So I think he had a responsibility to approach it exactly.
But they all collectively not just understand or know that actually losing this game, or the sort of bizarre fair play rule, that's going to see us get an easier
I really don't think so. You can't get into everybody's mindset, but I really don't see that. The players coming in for the first game, there's a lot of changes in that England team. I'm not saying you can't. It's easily said there's places up for grabs. Players coming in, they know that. Yeah. Players coming in, no, it's not really place up for grabs. Yeah. Maybe one or two positions. Danny Rowe was coming in, may have thought great 90 minutes potentially me starting. Yeah. Maybe Rashford coming in ahead of potentially starting. So one or two players may have thought an opportunity to actually play in the last 16, but other players there, the likes of Vardy coming in, Jones, Cahill, knew this was, you know, one night only. But even still, the determination they would have wanted to play well, to win the game, to have that on their CD. They played in a World Cup, they played 90 minutes in a winning team. That would absolutely override absolutely everything.
Completely. And I think when you look at somebody like Jamie Vardy, like, to say that he went out there with the possibility of losing and said that opportunity of losing looks quite attractive to me, it's just not true. That's just not the way he approaches games of football. It's the same with Eric Dyer, despite the fact that inadvertently he might have played in a way which would have allowed England to lose, but the purpose certainly wasn't to lose. I think to say that Jordan Pickford's dive was done in a manner that was deliberate, to not try and catch the ball.
I'm not even saying that, right? Like, the difficulty here is that it is such to a degree, right? Because it's such an untypical game, because everything you say is obviously 100% accurate to 99.99999% of games that these players will ever play. So that's the mindset of winning at all costs and no matter what. I just think it's such an outlier of a game. Like, one thought, and we mentioned it outside, that I had was that at some point in the week, you bank the fact that England have got the most preferable route. And they would have been aware of that before they went into the game, that actually losing the game or having a worse fair play record would have resulted in a more favourable route. So that just exists. There wasn't any ambiguity about it. If this happens, if that happens, that was
you're
in the bank.
Ahead to the quarter-final draw.
That's
potentially.
In the bank, right? Yeah. So, I mean, in that context, does like a Vardy or a Rashford at some point go up to Southgate? I'm not saying they would have ever openly discussed it as a team, right? Because, like you say, in terms of professionalism and stuff, that would have been a bit bizarre. But at some point in the week, I think if I'm Rashford, I'm going up to Gareth Southgate at some point and I'm going, listen.
This is Adrian's weakest argument in the morning, by the way.
If I get one-on-one, I'm just saying, I think this is what I would have done. If I get one-on-one, do you want me to bang it or hit Rose Ed?
Oh, come on.
Thank you.
Come on.
Thank you. Let's leave it there.
All I'm saying is, sorry, listen to what I'm saying.
We just did.
Who the hell would actually have an argument?
I'm not having an argument. I'm saying that I would have gone to the manager. Like, I'm not saying, it's up to Gareth Southgate to go, no, listen, you got to put that in the back of the net.
Can you imagine what Gareth Southgate, what your perception would be? I'm going to buy into this anyway. I shouldn't even be having this conversation. I'm going to buy into it anyway. Like, can you imagine Gareth Southgate's perception of those players, what he would have thought of those players having left the room and come to see him and say, Gaffer, do you want me to put that ball in the back of the net? Or have I got your permission to actually kick this ball
just
wide?
so we're sure, I put that away, right?
Oh, come on.
The only argument...
So, imagine the...
He's not being serious. He's not being serious.
I'm 100% being serious.
How much respect would you have for Marcus Rashford
exactly.
if he even asked you that
Exactly.
question?
It's not going to happen. It's telling the centre forward not to hit the target when he could score a World Cup as well. The only argument I made to Adrian, which I think does stand up, where the manager potentially that could influence things, and he'd never admit to this, almost like in a very subliminal level, is in terms of the team that they picked, the amount of changes that both Belgium and England in particular made. Because I think if England had to win that game, top the group, to play Sweden or Switzerland in the quarterfinals, I'd hazard a guess you wouldn't have seen quite as many changes. You would have seen a number in terms of yellow cards, you would have seen a little bit of a shuffle in the pack, but as many as 8 changes, I don't think so. So if you're asking me in terms of any kind of evidence that potentially Southgate isn't devastated at the fact that they've come second in the group and potentially going to be facing Sweden or Switzerland ahead of Brazil, that would have been it. The actual amount of changes
and he doesn't bring on Harry Kane if he's chasing the game.
But he can camouflage that by saying, "Oh, players need, yellow cards. I need to get game time, cohesion with the squad. I need to make these changes." So he can kind of camouflage it in that respect and get away with it. But that's the only way. That's the only argument for me in terms of potentially.
He didn't want to win the game. That's what you're saying.
Not that he didn't want to win the game, but there's not utter devastation that they haven't, and they've come second in the group.
The whole spectre of this changed yesterday at 5 o'clock when Colombia came second in Group H. It changed everything. At that point, England and Belgium's mentality was, right, we need to top this group, because you can forget about the quarterfinals, because we've got a hell of a battle on our hands if we don't get Japan in the last 16. Japan, the weakest side in the last 16. And that was the reward for finishing top. It was a free pass into the quarterfinals.
I know, but
it
then
changed everything when Colombia finished second.
And actually, look, I think that's actually a valid point. We have a bit of a look at the schedule there on the screen. But yeah, I think that's the point. Like that, it is that actually Belgium have the easier game up next, but obviously England are sort of way ahead of themselves. They're not even considering that game. It's like, well, when we beat Colombia, and Colombia are a pretty good team, obviously. But
a quarter-final result for England is a good result. Yeah. And getting Japan in the last 16 would have been a golden ticket for Gareth Southgate to go home to England and say, listen, we had a good World Cup. Plus, you get a free hit at Brazil.
Yeah, I would have liked. I must admit, I would have liked it in England as a standalone game, England v Brazil, because I still think, and that was a poor result last night, but they're still a dangerous team. They get the strongest team out, as we spoke about before. The energy, the pace they have high up the pitch. Particularly, Brazil have had their moments defensive in the competition already, where you look at them and think, yeah, you can get at them. Not particularly across the defensive line, but the protection they have in front. I'm not a big massive fan of Casemiro and that hold in midfield position. How he's in there ahead of Fernandinho, I don't know. Fernandinho for me is head and shoulders above him in terms of the quality of his defending, reading danger, mobility, quick over the ground. And as well as that, Casemiro, he's got Coutinho and Paulino ahead of him, who again only want to go one way, head up to the other end of the pitch. So for me, the type of players that England have in forward areas of the pitch, the likes of Dele Alli, Lingard, obviously Harry Kane, not so much pace, but Sterling and a bit of pace down the flanks. Even Brazil, as good as they are going forward, England, for me, a dangerous side to cause them problems. Yeah. So in some ways, I think it's a little bit of a shame if they don't get them, which they won't now in the quarterfinals.
I did enjoy the ITV reporter after the game saying to Gareth Southgate, Gareth, did you know that now by having lost this game, you are now going to have the easier route if we were to progress to the later stages? Like as if this was new news to Gareth Southgate, who, to be fair to him, held a very sort of stern face to seriously address the question.
Yeah, but what we haven't talked about is kind of a little bit of a negative mindset, because over in the UK, and it's been building a little bit of positivity, particularly off the back of Panama. Has really been a lot of talk now, a lot of feel good around the team, even the players themselves, the confidence amongst the players, and they haven't had a bump of the road as yet. Two good wins, scoring a lot of goals, against substandard opposition, but even still, the atmosphere is great. The team, it's all been good. There hasn't been one kind of negative spin. Now all of a sudden, boom, a bump on the road. They've lost, whether in terms of that little bit of maybe self-doubt. There'll be a couple of little negative headlines now in the UK papers this morning, so it'll be interesting to see how that kind of affects
they're all
dynamic within the squad.
I saw some of the flashes from some of the UK papers. I don't know if some of them are reflected here, but they're all like, this is well done, England, where the road is clear. Let's go for it. They're all sort of seeing the path.
But so now in terms of the performance,
so take a quick flip at
I'll be very surprised there's not a little bit of criticism in terms of maybe the manner of the.
I think they've written it off. I think they're just writing it off as a listen. We weren't really trying a leg here. Still think this was a clever idea, Gareth.
There you go. That's hardly
so to be fair, this is backing up your point, Kenny.
Cheers, Adrian. Thanks for that. Just shove yourself under the bus there.
Second best asks the Sun.
This is what I'm talking about. So you're going to get this. This was always
well played, lads. There we go. Come on.
That sarcasm, heavy sarcasm there, Adrian.
The Sun do not do sarcasm, Kenny. Come on, they beat you over the head with the bloody obvious.
Lucky lose. So that's what I'm saying.
Pass to the semis, Jesus.
This way to the final. Here we go. That's what I was getting at. There we go. That's the one.
That's more delusional than the Panama reaction. Way more delusional. To say that this Colombia game is just a complete write-off. It's absolute nonsense.
No, there won't be. Oh, no, I promise you, there will be some argument over in the UK papers this morning in terms of big reality check here now. We've been getting a little bit carried away. Let's come back down to earth now in terms of.
Doesn't sound like
being
realistic.
Headlines. Yeah, but that's just agents being selected.
Let's forget about those UK papers at 8:10 this Friday morning. Let's look at the Examiner, where they couldn't care less about the World Cup. That's not quite true. They've got a celebratory Adnan Januzaj here at the top, but it is a picture of Cork star Fitzgibbon ahead of the Munster hurling final against Clare at Semple Stadium this Sunday, and he's feeling less pressure there. So a lot of good GA stuff in the Examiner this morning, which doesn't apply across a lot of the papers today, including in the Irish Times. There's not a huge amount. There's a little bit on the back. There's nothing at all about the football qualifiers, incredibly, in the Irish Times that I can find anyway. It's dominated by the World Cup in the front here, and the putting a lot of dive on it, as you can see there. That we mentioned a bit earlier on, Jordan Pickford getting himself across there with, many feel, the wrong arm. Januzaj settles battle of the B teams as Southgate rolls the dice. Mary Hannigan's always interesting take, the view from the couch. England win, but are they happy? It's all relative in theory. Some good stuff there, and analysing all the various pundits across ITV, RTE and the BBC. Next up, we are going to the Times Ireland edition to have a little look there again. Colombia promise English a fight to the death, as we see Marwan Fellaini's hair in full flight. That was from the game, reflection of the game yesterday. That's the Times Ireland edition. The Irish News, meanwhile, this is a couple of Cavan players that were McVitie and one other that were Moyna, that were had their red cards rescinded and are available to play in the qualifiers this weekend. Criticism of Ulster is unfair, says Midcleaner. This is the obviously criticism of the general sort of play of Ulster football on, that it's wide of the mark.
Yeah, but like just on the suspensions.
Yeah.
Like this is the second week in a row where, because of the fact where there's been a huge brawl, players are getting rewarded for the added violence. And what I mean by that is, were McVitie and Moyna singled out for two-man brawls, or the two of them and two down players, the suspension would have been upheld. But because we've got whatever grainy footage, one camera at the game, and because it was an all-out mass brawl involving 20-plus players and members of staff, it therefore meant that the suspension couldn't be followed through, which is a complete paradox. And I'm not saying that McVitie and Moyna are in the wrong here. By all means, they could have easily got off. But the Armagh players getting off last week before their minor or their under-20 final was an absolute disgrace. And those scenes in the Cavan and Down game, they almost seemed placid because we'd all got conditioned to watching that Armagh Tyrone under-20s, like the disgusting nature of that brawl. And last week, like you see Gerard McKiernan going up to a down player and rubbing it right in his face after he's kicked a winning point or something, after they've won the game. And that kicks the whole thing off. It was Cavan's fault that this brawl ensued. And they got 2 players suspended, which was getting their comeuppance for rubbing a player's face in it at the end. Now, granted, that down fellow was probably saying stuff to Gerard McKiernan during the game, but they got their comeuppance, Cavan, and now they're after getting off. And granted, I'm coming back to the point here that McVitie and Moyna may well not have been in the wrong. It's very hard to make any kind of distinction from the video footage that might have been at the hand of the CHC here. But it's just another kind of poor attempt to try and point the way to the GEA cleaning up the act in terms of these brawls, in terms of some of the scenes we're seeing. And you don't want to tar Ulster with the same brush, but ultimately the 2 biggest brawls we've seen this summer have involved 4 different Ulster counties. A bit
like VAR, they just need to stand over their decision sometimes and say, actually, that was the right call, and let's just...
Sometimes injustice needs to be carried out, and maybe it wasn't injustice, maybe it was injustice for McVitie and Moyna to get banned, but maybe the rest of Ulster wakes up and says, listen, if anybody gets involved, 2 of our best players could get suspended, even if they're just milling around the brawl and not actually pulling any punches, you know? Like, I don't know, but it's fairly demoralising from this standpoint.
We are coming to VAR later on, Kenny, by the way.
Oh, no, I'll be gone. I'll be down Grafton Street. I'll be down Grafton Street then. I'll be having a coffee.
Finally, for me, Racing Post, second preference is their reflections on England's defeat to Belgium at the World Cup yesterday. England in the softer half as Belgian backups triumph. Owen.
The front page of the Herald sports section is Jan de Man for Belgium. England's second string beaten and settled for runners-up prize of last 16 tie against Colombia. Just a quick Kieran Whelan update, as always, on a Friday. This week, his column says, based on awesome show in Cork, I think the Kingdom will be champs. The Dubs have tapped into cute whoerism this morning, and Kieran Whelan predicting Kerry for the All-Ireland. So when Dublin do win the All-Ireland in September, we can point back to Kieran Whelan's column there. The back page of the Mirror is Easy Street. England's second string failed Belgium test, but now find themselves in the better half of the draw. While on the back page of the Star this morning, it is second best. Woeful England, lucky losers. And you've got Osei Can Roo C. That's Wayne Rooney there in his good DC one. United. It is very good in his DC United kit. And no Dubs plan. Kieran Cunningham here writing that there's no plans in place to move Dublin out of Croke Park for one of their Super 8s fixtures. Dublin, of course, playing 2 games in Croke Park as it stands, despite the fact that their game against Donegal is set for a neutral venue. The neutral venue will be Croke Park. The back page of the Sun is second best. Garrett says momentum is still there. England 0, Belgium 1. And then finally to a couple of the English the UK broadsheets we've seen. The tabloids. The Guardian is second best. England to face Colombia in the last 16 and hope it proves to be easier half of the draw. And we can bring you the Guardian, or the Telegraph rather. Bitter, momentum lost as Southgate's B team, some to defeat, final group match, and sweet. Beat Colombia, then Sweden or Switzerland, and the semi-final awaits.